Topic 4. What are the causes of population growth? Subtopic. How many people die and how many are born each year? The world population has grown rapidly, particularly over the past century. In 1900 there were fewer than 2 billion people on the planet, today there are 7.7 billion. The change in the world population is determined by two metrics, the number of babies born, and the number of people dying. Subtopic. How many are born each year? In 2015, there were approximately 140 million births, 43 million more than back in 1950. Subtopic. How many die each year? In 2015 around 55 million people died. The world population therefore increased by 84 million in that year, that is an increase of 1.14%. Subtopic. As the number of deaths approaches the number of births, global population growth will come to an end. How do we expect this to change in the coming decades? What does this mean for population growth? Population projections show that the yearly number of births will remain at around 140 million per year over the coming decades. It is then expected to slowly decline in the second half of the century. As the world population ages, the annual number of deaths is expected to continue to increase in the coming decades until it reaches a similar annual number as global births towards the end of the century. As the number of births is expected to slowly fall and the number of deaths to rise, the global population growth rate will continue to fall. This is when the world population will stop to increase in the future. Subtopic. Why is rapid population growth a temporary phenomenon? Explanation. The demographic transition. Population growth is determined by births and deaths, and every country has seen very substantial changes in both. In our overview on how health has changed over the long run, you find the data on the dramatic decline of child mortality that has been achieved in all parts of the world. And in our coverage of fertility you find the data and research on how modern socio-economic changes, most importantly structural changes to the economy and a rise of the status and opportunities for women, contributed to a very substantial reduction of the number of children that couples have. But declining mortality rates and declining fertility rates alone would not explain why the population increases. If they happened at the same time, the growth rate of the population would not change in this transition. What is crucial here is the timing at which mortality and fertility changes. The model that explains why rapid population growth happens is called the demographic transition. It is shown in the schematic figure. It is a beautifully simple model that describes the observed pattern in countries around the world and is one of the great insights of demography. 9. The demographic transition is a sequence of 5 stages. Stage 1. High mortality and high birth rates. In the long time before rapid population growth, the birth rate in a population is high, but since the death rate is also high, we observe no or only very small population growth. This describes the reality through most of our history. Societies around the world remained in stage 1 for many millennia, as the long-run perspective on extremely slow population growth highlighted. At this stage the population pyramid is broad at the base, but since the mortality rate is high across all ages and the risk of death is particularly high for children, the pyramid gets much narrower towards the top. Stage 2, mortality falls but birth rates still high. In the second phase the health of the population slowly starts to improve and the death rate starts to fall. Since the health of the population has already improved, but fertility still remains as high as before, this is the stage of the transition at which the size of the population starts to grow rapidly. Historically, it is the exceptional time at which the extended family with many, surviving, children is common. Stage 3, mortality low and birth rates fall. Later the birth rate starts to fall and consequentially the rate at which the population grows begins to decline as well. Why the fertility rate falls is a question that we answer here. But to summarize the main points, when the mortality of children is not as high as it once was, parents adapt to the healthier environment and choose to have fewer children. The economy is undergoing structural changes that makes children less economically valuable, and women are empowered socially and within partnerships and have fewer children than before. Stage 4, mortality low and birth rates low. Rapid population growth comes to an end in stage 4 as the birth rate falls to a similar level as the already low mortality rate. The population pyramid is now box-shaped, as the mortality rate at young ages is now very low. The younger cohorts are now very similar in size, and only at an old age the cohorts get smaller very rapidly. Stage 5, mortality low and some evidence of rising fertility. The demographic transition describes changes over the course of socio-economic modernization. What happens at a very high level of development is not a question we can answer with certainty, since only few societies have reached this stage. But we do have some good evidence which we review here, that at very high levels of development fertility is rising again. Not to the very high levels of pre-modern times, but to a fertility rate that gets close to 2 children per woman. What level exactly the fertility rate will reach is crucial for the question of what happens to population growth in the long run. If the fertility rate stays below 2 children per woman, then we will see a decline of the population size in the long run. If indeed the fertility rate will rise above 2 children per woman, we will see a slow long-run increase of the population size.